So what lesson did we learn from the breakout session on the role of economic analysis in merger control? I think there was a very rich discussion in each one of the breakout session. And I'm going to start by the third breakout session, which was devoted to the general role of economics in merger control. What came out of this discussion, I think, are two main points. The first one is that the role of economists has been better and better understood over the years in merger control and better appreciated by non-economists. So that's an important issue. And in particular, the role of economists not only to crunch numbers, but also to provide theories of harm and interesting issues about the particular mergers that the Economies gets involved in. So I think we know that economic analysis can bring three things in competition in general: concepts, measurement, and reasoning. And I think that those two, measurement and reasoning, have been quite important in merger control and are widely recognized as being important. The second thing that the breakout session discussed was the role of economists in merger control. And there, I think two things came out. On the one hand, it's very useful to have economists participating in the investigation, being part of the investigatory team quite early on, associated with the development of the case. And the reason for this is obvious. It's because economic analysis is going to require data, and you need to have the right kind of data right from the beginning of the case, because it's very hard to gather this data later on in the case. But there's a second possible role for economists, which is to be a second pair of eyes. Once the investigation has been finished, having a chief economist team review the case to see whether it is robust enough or to advise the competition authority is also very important. And in some jurisdictions, we see that there are both economists, part of the investigator team, and as well as economists as a second pair of eyes at the end of the investigation. Let me now turn to the important issue of data gathering, which was reviewed by the Breaking Group number 1. And I think there that the lessons are, first of all, that gathering the right data is extremely important because that is what is going to allow us to have faith in the economic reasoning, to see that the economic reasoning is relevant to the particular case. And that this evidence gathering very much depends on a number of circumstances. The first one is the specific case at hand. We don't necessarily need the same kind of data depending on the kind of merger that we review. So it's very much on a case-by-case basis that the data gathering should be evaluated. It is also, of course, going to depend on the availability of the data. What data can one get? And it's finally going to depend on the resources of the competition authority. So I think those three things: the specific nature of the case, the specificity of the case, the availability of the data, and the resources of the competition authorities determine what kind of economic analysis is going to be useful in the case. There was a discussion in this group about different techniques, and depending on the data that you want, there may be different economic techniques that one can resort to. A discussion on consumer survey, which in the jurisdiction where they can be used as evidence in legal proceedings, and this is not all jurisdictions, but in the jurisdiction where it is possible, consumer surveys can be hugely important to determine what are the preferences of consumers and what their reactions may be to the events created by the merger. So it's a very useful technique, but there is a caveat. Consumer survey have to be established on the right methodological basis, and the design of the survey is of the utmost importance. And this is one of the reasons, for example, when economists are going to use a consumer survey in a case, why they should be involved right at the beginning of the data gathering process, but also that they should participate in the design of the consumer survey. Let me now turn to the third group, which was devoted to the particular role of quantitative analysis. And I think that there are 2 points which are important. The first one is that quantitative analysis is a complement, but not a substitute to qualitative analysis. And as a matter of fact, economists can contribute to both. They can contribute to quantitative analysis through their computing techniques, but they can also contribute to the qualitative assessment of a merger through their reasoning and the use of qualitative economic reasoning to understand what the case is all about. So one shouldn't think of economists as being limited to crunching numbers, but they also have a huge role to play in the qualitative understanding of the case. The second intuition that came out of this discussion is the fact that it is very hard to convince competition authorities, and even more difficult to convince judges, purely on the basis of an economic reasoning. And the reason for this is that judges are not used to starting from hypothesis to conclude, to have a reasoning and then a conclusion, because they always suspect that maybe the hypotheses are not the right ones. And judges do not like speculation, they like facts. So what that means is the fact that when presenting a case, economists should certainly give the result of their analysis, but they should also try to translate this into something which is both intuitive and comprehensible by competition boards and judges. In other words, intuition is a good complement to economic analysis because it makes this economic analysis even more credible than the numbers are, and it reassures the boards of competition authorities or the judge because they understand why the theory should be right. So I think that all of this was a very rich discussion on the use of economics and also on some of the limitation or some of the costs. And I thank all the participants to the Breaking Out session for having been so diligent and interesting in the development. Thank you very much.
Hi, let me briefly summarize some key takeaway from the breakout session on the use of surveys and other data gathering techniques in merger investigations. The first presentation in the session made by Australia emphasized the type of mergers in which the Australian ACCC tend to use surveys. These are mainly supermarket mergers in which surveys are used to test the geographic scope of the market. Two main limitations raised are that surveys lack evidentiary value in legal proceedings and the need to have experts presenting them in courts. The borderline between conducting surveys in-house and outsourcing them is that the ACCC would survey businesses but outsource if it needs to survey customers. Other very useful data sources being used by the ACCC are credit card transaction data and loyalty cards data. In addition, in petrol station merger cases, the ACCC finds it useful to use high-frequency price data collected by a private firm. The second presentation, made by India's delegates, was focused on the Schneider merger case, in which the CCI used market surveys, information requests, and third-party reach-outs to understand key differences between CCI's and the parties' understanding of consumer habits and market position of competitors. The CCI notes that despite its original intention to outsource the survey administration, it eventually administrated the survey itself. Kenya mentioned that, like Australia, it tends to outsource surveys targeting customers. For example, in a recent survey conducted for a market study of digital credit, it approached consumers by phone, in part due to the COVID-19 crisis, but also since this approach generates a high response rate and an ability to ask follow-up questions relative to online surveys. The Philippines presentation discussed the various data gathering techniques used by the PCC. These techniques include interviews, surveys, focus group discussions, cooperation with sector regulators, field missions, calls for comments, mystery shopping, and desk research. The PCC noted that focus groups are often used as a follow-up to surveys, either where there are conflicting results or to validate surveys, or as an alternative to survey when they are too time-consuming or expensive. In the recent Grab-Uber merger, the PCC conducted consumer surveys to determine the degree to which consumers were price sensitive. The results of this survey were useful for conducting the SNP test. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone. I'm summarizing the discussion at the Breakout Session A2 on the quantitative analysis of mergers. This breakout session discussed the relevance, types, and possibilities to conduct quantitative analysis in merger investigations. It discussed the functions of quantitative analysis as well as the different methods and the circumstances that affect the possibility and opportunity to conduct certain types of quantitative analysis. Merger analysis involves predicting a future world following consummation of a merger that might not have yet occurred. Competition authorities need to build a puzzle with different pieces that fit together to assess the merger. The types of pieces of the puzzle include, amongst others, historical evidence, documents, companies' business plans, and market analysis. Quantitative analysis can be a major piece of this puzzle. First, concerning the role of economists in merger analysis, the discussion highlighted that a hybrid structure in competition agencies' internal organization, where economists are present both across all departments and divisions and in a specialized office such as the chief economist team, is interesting, so that the degree of economic analysis can be adjusted to the circumstances of the case. As highlighted in the presentation by Chinese Taipei, the specialized chief economist team can provide support upon request of the handling unit, while the presence of economists in all teams allow incorporating at least basic economic thinking in every case. Authorities must select the most relevant quantitative methodology in every case. First, the specific quantitative tool to use will depend on the facts of the case. The digital world, as well as the post-COVID-19 economy, might pose additional challenges in the choice of the most relevant methodology. Second, the sort of quantitative analysis that can be conducted depends on data availability. Data are often limited, and it can be time-consuming to collate from different sources, such as from the parties, competitors, consumers through surveys, or market studies. Quantitative analysis can be helpful in different ways. It can assist the definition of relevant markets as well as the identification of remedies. Hungary presented an interesting case showing the quantitative analysis has an important impact on the outcome of the merger decision. In a case concerning petrol stations, although it could not reach a definitive conclusion as to the precise relevant geographic market, the analysis assisted GVH in identifying the right behavioral remedies tailored to the concerned narrowly defined geographic area. Quantitative analysis can also greatly support or clarify the outcomes of qualitative evidence. In an interesting case presented by Romania, the results of qualitative evidence were mixed as to what products could be considered substitutes. RCC applied quantitative analysis such as shock analysis, price correlation analysis, and relative price stationarity analysis to define separate markets. Finally, as highlighted in the presentation given by the Russian Federation, quantitative analysis is a complement rather than a substitute to qualitative analysis. Authorities need to adopt a holistic approach. Eventually, merger review requires a judgment call considering all the evidence against the statutory test. Thank you very much for all the participants for contributing to this discussion, and I would also like to thank all of you for watching this video. Bye-bye.
Hello, in Breakout Session A3 we discussed the two topics of the role of economists in merger teams and secondly qualitative evidence review. We had 4 country presentations from Norway, Fiji, Korea and Spain, and these were each followed by Q&A for the specific presentations and then a general Q&A at the end of the session. So Norway presented first, and they talked about how their agency has gone to considerable lengths to really integrate economic analysis into merger review with strong vertical and horizontal linkages to support the work of economists in that process. They also, about 50% of their staff are economists. And they also told us about their internal network for quantitative analysis, which has been particularly successful in enhancing the internal capacity for use of quantitative analysis in both merger review and other matters. And this is led by the chief economist team, and it provides a more specialized knowledge on quantitative assessment. Fiji then reported that the analysis and evidence gathering in merger review has been carried out entirely by economists in that agency, at least recently. And they gave the example of one particular merger matter recently where they focused almost entirely on qualitative rather than quantitative analysis. And the main reason for that was that whilst there was potentially quite a reservoir of data available to them, it was widely dispersed and would have been quite costly to collect and analyse, and importantly, may not have been very helpful in terms of determining the likely effects of the merger because structural conditions of entry into the relevant market were changing. Korea then reported that their agency has 10 economists, 5 in the economic analysis division, which is led by the chief economist, and 5 other in general investigation divisions. While emphasizing the importance of economic analysis in merger review, Korea said that in their agency, economists still tend to take a secondary role compared to the lawyers. Korea also presented on a recent merger case where the role of qualitative evidence had been important in choosing the relevant quantitative merger simulation model that should be used to analyze a particular merger. Spain then reported that 35% of their staff are economists, and like Norway and Korea, it has a hybrid structure where the economists are both assigned to a specialized unit and integrated into general case teams. And the economists in the specialized unit tend to focus more on the quantitative analysis, whereas those assigned to case teams tend to focus on the qualitative analysis. And Spain also presented on a recent merger case where the economists had played an important role in both the delineation of the relevant market, particularly geographic market, and secondly, of course, in analysing competitive effects and importantly, analysing the potential impact of a divestiture remedy that was offered and that needed to be adjusted to offset the potential impacts of the merger. So after these interesting presentations, we had a general Q&A, and there were a number of issues that were raised. One in particular was, when should economic analysis be brought into the merger? I think there was probably general consensus that it's important to get the economists in early, that they should be integrated into all areas of analysis. But at the same time, there was also recognition of the benefits of having a second set of eyes, somebody, an economist who is perhaps slightly removed, less closely involved in the investigation, to provide that sort of second view of how the questioning of assumptions that might be being made by the team, for example. And while this second set of eyes is very important and really emphasizes the benefit of having both strong vertical as well as horizontal linkages for economists in the organization, at the same time, it was also emphasized that the second set of eyes shouldn't just be brought in right at the end when it may be too late to make adjustments and pursue new avenues and so on. So perhaps having the second set of eyes come in at critical points along the way is the preferable way to go. Thank you.
The Breakout Session B1 discussed the use of surveys and other data gathering technique in merger investigations. In the session, we had 3 presentations by the delegations of Brazil, Denmark, and Mexico. The presentations were followed by Q&A discussions. In Brazil's presentation, CADE explained the types of data, the software, and technique used to analyze the data. Brazil described CADE's 2019 guideline for the data request. It went through how it requests quantitative information, for example, providing detailed instructions and attaching an Excel template. About the survey, Brazil explained that CADE used surveys in order to reduce information asymmetries and check their assumptions. The surveys are applied to both consumers and competitors. By the way, CAD's most common data gathering technique is issuing requests for information to merging parties and competitors. When the merger concerns regulated markets, CADE also demands the data to regulatory bodies. Next, Denmark discussed the DCCA's experience with collecting market data from individual firms. They discussed the challenge of identifying data, collecting the data, and confidentiality, and then presented a case example of an insurance merger. Like Brazil, when collecting data, Denmark stressed the importance of clear instruction and working closely with data providers. On confidentiality, Denmark noted the highly sensitive nature of data provided by individual firms and the importance of being able to ensure strict confidentiality. It spoke about its experience in the insurance merger, where it set up an analysis room to provide parties access to data. Mexico provided an overview of Mexican legal framework for merger control in the telecommunications and broadcasting sectors. The first source of information for the IFT is merging parties. Then information requests from any relevant person, economic agent, or public authority. IFT discussed an example of a merger case, AT&T Time Warner merger, describing the type of information obtained and the parties this information was obtained from. The IFT noted that when dealing with mergers concerning multi-sided platforms, standard economic tools standard economic analysis are often not directly applicable. The economic analysis for the multi-sided market, including zero-price media market, can be extremely complex, and so we must take into account multiple groups. It means we need a lot more and different kind of information. In this session, we discussed many issues at the quite detailed level. Among discussions, I want to note two impressive techniques. First one is the effort to get a precise data. Utilizing the Excel template would be very helpful, even to the highly skilled authorities. Second one is about the survey design. The shutdown question for the diversion ratio might be very effective when the price increase question is expected to lead imprecise answers. Thank you for watching this survey data session.
Hello, this is a short report on the second breakout group on quantitative techniques in merger analysis that I had the privilege to chair at the OECD last week. Now, this group discussed essentially the use of the variety of tools that we have at our disposal as economists to help contribute to a legal analysis of merger control. We all know that there's a wide array of such tools, ranging from relatively simple things like price correlation, going through more complicated things like measure of upward pressure, and graduating all the way to very extensive exercises like natural experiment or the specification of a calibrated or estimated model of the industry. But we also know in our life as economists for competition authorities that whether we can use those instruments also depend a lot on the circumstances, on the times that we have, and on the data that is available. This theme that we have a wide portfolio of tools and that the choice of this tool depends not only on the data available but on really the true purpose of the exercise was well illustrated by the intervention of the member states in this session. Starting with Colombia, we were kind of led through a discussion of two cases, one of which I will mention more explicitly, which was a case about isotonic beverages. Isotonic beverage, essentially what we call more popularly sports drinks. And of course, this is a market where you have a bunch of brands, and these are differentiated products. And normally, the first kind of reaction we would have, say, oh, let's go and get kind of switching data to see whether the brand in question in this case, which was Gatorade, is actually especially close competitors to any of the other brands, including the brand that was supposed to be acquired. Unfortunately, at Colombia at the time, such switching data was not available at all. So the Colombian authority has to switch down from this kind of first best tool and do with other tools that they had. And the two tools that they essentially ended up using was essentially a quantitative form of price correlation, finding out that the pricing dynamics of Gatorade were quite different from the pricing dynamics of any other isotonic drinks, including the one that was supposed to be acquired. And they then completed this by a demand estimation analysis, again looking for substitution effects, and controlling with instruments. Another example of this general theme of being creative in using economic analysis confronted with a specific situation was provided by the Belgian team. The Belgian team was confronted with cases where the analysis of local markets was especially important. And we know that this analysis of local markets, can be especially important in industries like supermarkets, cement, and so on. The local dimension is important. The problem is that when you're confronted with a multitude of potential local markets, there's absolutely no way that you can conduct, 65 or 200 SNP analysis. That's just not going to work. Even if were going to do it, if you just do this in a simplified way, where you build the region based on a distance from the center. In a country like Belgium, which is complex road infrastructures, different densities of population in different places, and different densities of businesses, such a simple approach would probably get the answer wrong. So what the team developed based on some digital instrument, digital Google Maps type of instrument, was a method to define catchment areas based on observable characteristics. Observable characteristics being things like density and also actual times of travel from one point to the other using the kind of developed routing timing software that we already have. So here again, it's a departure from what we would normally do with some kind of snip test, but then an adaptation to what was actually feasible, including in this case, an improvement in the methodology. Now, Sweden got us into the fascinating world of cheese. And the issue here, again within a merger, was whether there was a broad market for cheese in Sweden or whether there was a sub-market defined by three types of very traditional Swedish cheese. So in order to do this, what the approach taken by the Swedish team was here to combine a number of instruments. So they did price correlation, they did critical loss analysis, they look at aggregate diversion ratio. So here again, the lesson is a bit different. It is when you have the data to do things, and they gather data through surveys as well, then there's nothing wrong about just combining different instruments. Because as we know, each instrument, although deep down they're related to the same theory of arming, to the same mechanism, have different requirements in terms of data. And therefore, by using several of them, you might feel more comfortable that your conclusion might be resistant to possible flaws in specific data. So that I found is a very kind of complete, comforting approach to the issue. And finally, we ended up with Norway, who looked at essentially a supermarket or kind of distribution kind of mergers. And there, again, the usual kind of switching data based on surveys was used, but it was also complemented by another type of analysis. It was a correlation analysis that tried to determine, a little bit in the spirit of the Belgian study, what were the objective criterion that would determine whether different stores were close substitute for each other or not. And this correlation analysis revealed that, maybe not surprisingly, but usefully, the two main criteria were distance and the size of stores. And this second criteria is interesting because it means that actually distance itself, how much of a distance you need to be or not be in the same catchment, in the same market, is different as you would expect depending on the size of the store. You are willing to travel more to go to a full service store where you're going to be able to do all of your monthly or your weekly shopping than travel to just get one item from a small store. So again, what is the general lesson here? The general lesson is that yes, we can always dream of using the fancier methods that are at our disposal. Fancier method I mentioned at the beginning, and that you have noticed were not used in any of the cases I discussed. There's a lesson there. Although as economists were attracted to those fancier tools, in practice, the cases we will be able to use them in an effective way are very small. The number of cases is very small. Therefore, we have, as shown by the member state, to become better in improvising, in adapting our methods, even if they're not sophisticated, to the data and the reality on the ground. And as the Belgians have shown, even in this maybe less glamorous approach to merger control, there are some useful innovation to be had. Thank you for your attention.
Hello everyone. The Breakout Session B3 discusses the role of economists in measure teams and qualitative evidence review. A number of very interesting points were raised and discussed at the session, including the evolution of the role of economists over the years and the involvement of external economists in merger cases. The session welcomed presentations by the delegations of BIAC, Canada, Mexico, the UK, and the US. The presentations were followed by lively Q&A and discussions. BIAC emphasized that while incorporating modern economic analysis in merger review can result in a better decision-making, there is also the potential for economic analysis itself to be misused in developing an erroneous theory of harm, especially where there is not enough data to conduct a given economic analysis. Canada reported that their economic expertise is handled by two directorates. First one is the Economic Analysis Directory, which consists of PhD and master level economists. Second one is the Measures Directory, comprised of about 40 case officers, with a significant number being an economist possessing a master's degree in economics. It is also presented a Bell MTS case study, where qualitative and quantitative analysis played an important role. The Federal Telecommunications Institute of Mexico reported that their direction of mergers and concessions counts 12 economists out of the total staff of 16. The high proportion of the economists in the direction reflects the fact that the core merger analysis of the Federal Telecommunications Institute is conducted by economists. The United Kingdom provided very insightful presentation and reported that the role of economists at the agency is not limited to the assessment of individual cases. In fact, they also play a significant role in process of continually updating the agency's toolkit that the CMA uses to assess mergers. For instance, economists contributed to develop the agency's analytical toolkit for digital services and technology products. The United States presents a case United States, AGR block, where the qualitative analysis conducted by economists play a significant role in allowing the DOJ to successfully block the merger. It's also observed a significant evolution of the role of economists over the 10 years, and noted that staff attorneys have increasingly appreciated the benefit of having economists in the review of qualitative analysis. After presentations and questions and answers, the floor was open for the general discussion, where advantages and disadvantages of the ex post review of merger control decisions were discussed. While recognizing the usefulness of such ex post review, it was also pointed out that sometimes the limited resources and capacities in getting enough information could be an obstacle in conducting ex post review. Thank you so much for your attention.